there's so much agency you have. And so I think that that's something I've learned over the years is like, even in every stage of life that I've had or every stage of parenting that I've been participating in, I have agency. And so it's amazing what we can do in our homes when we just first educate ourselves and learn a little bit, when we equip ourselves with some of the basic skills in this food conversation that would be like cooking and baking and fermenting and things like that.
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, J.N. Behringer, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. I am so ecstatic to be joined by one of the ladies that has become a good friend and is a podcaster herself. Her name is Liz Hazelmayer, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Liz because she is so cool. Liz Hazelmeyer is a homeschooling mom to 4 kids who shares her passion around food, family, and holistic health. She hosts the Homegrown podcast with her husband and runs an online retail shop featuring naturally minded products like lard dish soap and sourdough tools. Okay, this is amazing. Everyone who doesn't know, Liz is like the sourdough queen. So my sister-in-law, she was like, I want to do sourdough. I don't know how to do it. I thought you would know. I was like, I am not very good at it, but Liz is the best. So I sent her to your free guide.
Yeah.
And now her sourdough is like amazing because of you. So say hello, Liz.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Hi. Yeah. Thank you so much, Julie, for that awesome intro and having me on the show. I'm excited. We've had you on our show a few times, and this just feels like chatting with an old friend. So yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. So let's get down to, there's a few pieces there, right? You're a homeschooling mom, you're passionate about food, you do sourdough, you have your own store, but it was not always like this. I actually think your story is pretty incredible. So why don't we start with your story? How did you come to be where you're at now?
Yeah. So as a teenager, I really had a terrible relationship with food. I grew up in a household that was like standard 90s processed foods, a few speckled in cooked meals. Like I have like nostalgic home cooked meals that my mom definitely made. But, everyone was kind of like vibing on the like pre-prepared foods, the instant rice, the Hot Pockets, the Pop-Tarts for breakfast. And that's what I grew up on. And then as a teenager, I started to just feel like really lacking in understanding who I was and what my identity was. And unfortunately for me, I became hyper focused on controlling what I ate. And that started out as like, oh, I'm just going to be like really restrictive and restrict calories, but also restrict the types of foods I'm eating and work out a bunch. I remember at one point, like I was like, I'm going to eat 1,200 calories during the day, and then I'm going to go home and on the elliptical, I'm going to burn 1,200 calories because I just had no idea like how the body worked and that it had a baseline level of like nutritional needs and that I was actually shooting myself in the foot by doing this. But this is what I would do, and eventually that led to like blown bulimia for several years, inpatient treatment, like rehab therapy, the whole thing. And I'm very thankful for that journey because what it did was force me to really dig deep into what my body actually needs, what real foods actually are. And it wasn't even during all of those dietitian appointments and inpatient therapy that I learned about real food. Honestly, that was more like behavioral change. They were just trying to get you to be okay eating the cookie, like face your fear foods, basically was the message. And then I had a couple kids, and I had my first daughter really young. That threw me into being a single mom where my identity could no longer be this girl who struggled to eat. I changed. I had to focus on raising this young, beautiful daughter of mine, and then got married. And when we had babies really quickly, and my second born daughter had a birth defect, club feet, actually. So very sort of correctable, very reversible, nothing with really long-lasting effects, although she does still struggle a little bit today, but very manageable, I would say, and it was enough to rattle us and be like, that's really strange. Like, why is my baby's foot turned completely inward and needing serial casting and braces till age 5 and a heel cord release procedure where they literally sever her Achilles tendon. I mean, it's just not fun for a new parent. And, my heart goes to my husband, who that was his first biological daughter. And, that carries a lot of pain and heartache too. And so, um, through that journey, we turned inward, looked at our house, and to be honest, I had been living a really conventional life up until that point. Everything under my sink was like the conventional cleaners. I was using, the instant rice packets, and I was eating just how I grew up. Even after having gone through all of that sort of nutritional coaching during my eating disorder years, I didn't know what real food was until I found folks like the Weston A. Price Foundation, and we did crazy things like made homemade raw milk formula for our baby. And I just really saw how it impacted my family. It literally changed the trajectory of our family and continues to do so today. So then years later, as I'm homeschooling and my daughter's in the second grade and she's like wanting to learn about foods and be in the kitchen, I was looking for a curriculum to teach her about real food. And, there was like nothing out there. It was all like My Plate, the food pyramid. And so I thought, well, I'll just combine my knowledge and my love of design. And, I had been in like marketing and writing before. And I was like, I can just like write something for her. And so I did. And then that ended up being a much bigger project than I ever thought. Ended up turning into a full like workbook and something that we turned around and actually offered to other families. And it turns out a lot of other families also were looking for something similar. This was in 2021. So everyone was like maybe starting their homeschool journey and really interested in getting the truth about nutrition and real food and just back to our roots. And so it was a very ideal time to be having that conversation. And since then, it's just kind of blossomed.
I love that. I love hearing your story. I really want to pick out really quickly because I also had a eating disorder in high school. I was bulimic for most of that time, and just touching on like honoring, thank you for being vulnerable with us and telling us about your journey. But I know probably so many other women listening to this have struggled with that journey and have struggled with this piece of having an eating disorder, not knowing where to turn, and I think it says a lot about, I mean, there are a lot of pieces to this. Like, I think it's good that you got the nutritional therapy that you did and that they were able to support you and not being scared of the cookie or not being scared of eating. I also think how interesting it is that we are in a space in our country where we don't learn about food at all, like you pointed out. Like all we learned, like maybe you went to health class and they were like food pyramid, and here it is, and it has not evolved for like 100 years. It's been so long. And just looking at, I personally believe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that if we had more real food training from the time we were young, like you're doing with your kids, that we wouldn't have as many of these health issues in women when they got older, or these eating disorders. What do you think about that?
Oh, 100%. We grew up in a time where like the super skinny was the standard of beauty. So this
Mhm.
really, really thin model-esque body was what everyone was aspiring to have. And combine that with zero knowledge of food. And that is a recipe for disaster. And so I think what we're really trying to do is reverse our own experience and instill in our daughters, because we have 3 daughters, what it's like to eat real food, what it means to fuel your body well, why you want to fuel your body well, why you want to build strength and be active and have daily movement. Because knowing that on the front end, I think does 2 things. One, it protects you from this crazy sort of like binge restriction cycle. And if you can just learn how to enjoy foods that you love while also understanding them within the context of a whole nourished diet, you can enjoy your birthday cake. Like, you don't have to have guilt around that. You don't have to have this weird relationship. But then you can also have respect and appreciation for the foods on your plate on a daily basis, knowing that every dinner is going to be good and nourishing for you. And that if you're choosing a snack, how can you choose it to support that next activity? Like if you want to eat a handful of dried mango as a snack, great. It's a great pre-workout. Like go for a walk after. Or if you're just eating it alone, pair it with a beef stick. Like just learning how to support your body's natural systems is something that you and I were probably never taught. And it's so funny, in my daughter's co-op class the other week, they were like going over the food pyramid. And of course, this is like a local Christian co-op. So they have like the old poster from the 1990s. And my daughter, Ruth, who's 8, goes, "Mom, it was so funny because butter was in the junk food section and muffins were like down below in the healthy." And she was like, "Why is that crazy like that?" And I was like, you know what? That is why we have homegrown, because we still, a lot of us operate on this like, oh, we need 7 to 11 grains of servings of grains, and we need like all fat is bad, especially if it comes from an animal. And we've just lost our connection with nature. And so if we can remarry both a respect for food and also like bring back the joy in it a little bit and not be scared of the foods that we're eating, then we won't have this like perfectly laid out opportunity for something to bud like an eating disorder. And I really want to avoid that for my own girls.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And I think the way that we have demonized food, and especially food that comes from natural sources like animal fats, like you
Hmm.
touched on, and not just processed food, is a huge, indicator of why we are where we are and why so many women feel the way that they do. And I want to dig into that just a little bit more because there's other things about your story I want to touch on, but I would love to just dig in a little bit more about, like, let's talk a little more about the food pyramid and why we don't love it. Like some people might be like, why don't you like the food pyramid? And, what is this? I love grains. Grains are healthy. So can we just like dig in a little bit more about like why are we saying what we're saying about animal fats or even and stuff from animals and grains, things like that?
Hmm. Yeah, the first lesson that I wrote when creating the first workbook for Homegrown was literally titled Forgetting the Pyramid. And I just think it's so helpful for everyone, adults and children alike, to take that image that we all know and set it to the side and instead pick up the food groups. So you can have food groups and they're not in any hierarchical order. It's just look at them on a plain thing. You have your grains, legumes, and nuts and seeds, all of those which are optimally digested when they are sprouted or soaked or fermented. And even having that layer of nuance is never found when the USDA is trying to teach kids about food. They're just like, here's a muffin, here's a piece of bread. They don't talk about the quality of that bread, how that bread was created, if it was a fermented product, if the grains were desiccated with glyphosate. Like they don't go into that. They just say, here's your bread, and this is at the bottom, this is the supporting food group of your nutrition, is what that really communicates. And so forget the pyramid, just look at food groups. You've got your nuts, grains, legumes, and seeds. Then you've got like your fruits and vegetables. And hopefully those are as fresh and local as possible. Hopefully they are not sprayed with loads of synthetic pesticide and herbicide if you can. Hopefully you're eating them seasonally. Again, there's just more layers there that you can talk about that the food pyramid misses. And then you've got your fats, which I like to say are like your animal fats. So your tallow, your lard, your bacon fat, your poultry fat like chicken or duck fat. And then you have your fruit fats, which would be like olive oil, coconut oil. What else am I missing? Avocado oil. And so those are great. And those are, again, ideally sourced from healthy animals and healthy plants. And then you have your sort of like your meat and your dairy. And that food group, your animal byproduct is what you could also call that. Again, those that encompasses way more than just the lean chicken breast, which is going to be on the food pyramid. That is including not only domesticated farmed animals like our chickens and our pigs and our cows, but also like wild game and You can have all parts of the animal. You can consume the animal's organs and their skin and their bones and all of the little bits that we tend to leave out in the modern American diet. And then with that, also learning to source your animals again, who are hopefully pasture raised, or if it's a pig, they're forested. So they're raised within the tree lines. And if it's a chicken, I there's so much nuance with poultry specifically, but it's like you want them to be pecking in the grass and eating the grasses and the bugs. And actually a lot of chicken farmers would say that some grain supplementation is normal and natural. And so I'm not always looking for just grain-free chicken, because they'll tell you they don't that's not even what they would eat in nature. They would be looking for the tops of those grasses, which would be the grains, right? And so learning and understanding how to source your food is key. And then seeing these four food groups just together on a piece of paper instead of in this like hierarchical pyramid helps shatter some of the assumptions that you and I grew up with. And then the other piece of that too is that you can have almost every good, like nostalgic, fun food within that context. So I'm not saying don't eat the bread. I'm just saying try sourdough, try having it fermented. If you're going to like bake a birthday cake, try to get organic wheat and use like real whole eggs and butter, like just the stuff that you'd have in your grandma's kitchen. And that way of looking at your food is a lot more representative of how we would eat if the food industry were not a thing. If we had not industrialized our food model, then we would just be eating what's local to us, what we can catch, what we can hunt, what we can fish for. Those are the things that would be supplying our calories on our dinner plate, and not these industrial processed packaged foods we find at the grocery store. And because we are, again, so disconnected from that, we almost have to relearn the basics of being human. And one of those things is eating food. And so part of me is like frustrated that we even have to like have these conversations. But the other part of me is like, I totally get it. Like I was there. And I still am having to like parse through the misinformation to figure out what's best for my family. So that's kind of how I view whole real food in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think that's really a great start for people to understand, like, let's go back to our roots. And I would like to touch on, can we talk about seed oil a little bit?
Yeah, I love talking about seed oils. It's like a buzzword right now, right? Everyone's like
Totally.
seed oils. Let's talk about it.
Mhm,
And I
mhm.
think there's two different things. There's oils genuinely pressed from a nut or a seed that are readily available. And I think some of these ones, like let's call it flaxseed oil or walnut oil, they're a little easier to extract, but you would never use them in like insane amounts because it just would be so unrealistic to like press that many walnuts, right? So you're going to see that in tiny amounts, maybe like drizzled over things or in specific culinary dishes. But the broad term of a vegetable oil is so frustrating to me because people think that that oil is somehow coming from a vegetable, and indeed it's not. It's coming from a seed. And usually the seed that is coming from is the canola plant, which is actually the rapeseed plant. And it's this little yellow flower. And canola is actually an acronym. It stands for Canadian Oil Low Uric Acid. And so, like in the 1970s, I believe, some Canadian researchers were like, hey, we can squish this tiny little black seed that comes out of this yellow flower and we can extract an oil from it. But it has this really high level of uric acid, which is like toxic to the human body. So if we can create a way for it to have lower of this acid, then we can like sell and market this as like whole, vegetable oil. And so people are being duped into thinking that they're choosing this like healthier fat when they're actually consuming this highly processed oil. And the reason why seed oils are getting so much flack, and honestly they should, is because of that extraction process. If you think about pressing an olive, think about how readily available those like juices, that oil is from coming out of the olive or the coconut, or the avocado. And so, or if you even if you think about animal fats, just simply rendering the fat of the animal, it's an easy process you can do in your kitchen. If you look at the soybean, or you look at the canola plant, or you look at like rice bran oil or these other seed oils, the process is so extraneous because you have to use high pressure, high heat. You have to then deodorize it because it smells so bad. It's honestly like a rancid product, but you can't tell on the nose because they're deodorizing it, they're bleaching it, and then they're putting it in a plastic bottle, and then it's sitting on a store shelf under fluorescent lighting, further oxidizing, and it just creates this product that is so inflammatory. And then if you want to get into the types of fats that that's including, it's a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, which are not bad in and of themselves. Like omega-6 is an essential fatty acid, but the fact is it's very volatile. And so it's going to oxidize and break down in the presence of heat. And unfortunately, to get that oil out of the seed, it had to be heated. So if you think about how that's already coming to you, sort of like pre-oxidized, and then just further, the further down it gets in the chain and in the line, it's continuing to break down. And then the end product again is so masked because it has been just like filtered and bleached and deodorized that you don't even know. You don't even know what that oil would have smelled like coming out of the facility. And so that's my issue with the term, quote, vegetable oil or seed oils, is it's not that we're like, just hating on it just because it's the trendy, crunchy culture. It's truthfully comes down to what happens in the extraction process. And that's why, again, you go back to what you would have had locally to you. I don't have the rape plant, I don't have those little yellow flowers in my yard that I would have pressed. That's just not how I, as Liz Hazelmeyer in Ohio, would have ever used fat in my daily kitchen. But because it sits on the grocery store shelf and it says vegetable oil, people are like, oh, it's healthy. It's great for you.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. And I do want to touch on that piece that you said, which is the locality of things, right? Like you don't have rapeseed just growing. And in the US, we don't have tons and tons of it. In England, they do. Like they do have, I've been through fields of rapeseed and, these yellow flowers, but just doing this nuance, because I think people get really scared about talking about like everything being bad, right? Like everything being toxic, everything being bad. And I think we want to put out there, and I know you're totally like this too, but like it's an 80-20, exactly like you said. Like you can have, sometimes you're going to have some seed oils no matter what you do. If you go to a restaurant, you're going to have some seed oils. You just will, right? Like that's our life right now. And that's what we live in. And it's not to, because I think a lot of people get worried like, oh, you're fear mongering on all these things and all the fear and all the fear. And no, it's not about the fear. It's about the information and just having information to choose how much you want to take into your body. Because, yeah, I probably will eat seed oils this week sometime. Like that's probably going to happen to me and it's probably going to happen to you. And like we're going to eat some processed food sometime. And it's just knowing the 80-20 to be able to, because I know when I first stepped into this world, for me, I remember reading A Mind of Your Own by Dr. Kelly Brogan, great book. But I was like, oh my gosh, like, oh my gosh, why is everything toxic? I'm so scared of everything being toxic. I can't do this. I'm overwhelmed. I felt frozen. And I think a lot of people feel frozen. And it's interesting that we're talking about this, that people feel frozen going back to our natural processes, our natural foods, right? We feel frozen because we have been so locked into processed foods for so long that we're like, I've had so many people ask me like, well, how do you do it? Right, without these processed foods. And of course, there's a difference between heavily processed stuff and lightly processed things. Like everything's been processed. Your grapes that you get at the store have been processed in some way, but it's about how many ingredients are in this food. Does it look different than the natural source? All those kinds of things. So I just want to put all that caveat out there to say we're not trying to scare anybody. If this is overwhelming for you, take it one step at a time, one piece at a time. We're not trying to shame anyone's diet. And I know like Liz and I both think this way. Like we're not trying to say there's a perfect diet for everybody. We're all learning. Like we're learning through the process. There are tons of different kinds of diets. You have to find what's good for you. But I do want to talk about this because I think it's so little talked about, is this locality piece. This idea that, right, like when you live in the South, like in Florida, maybe you need to eat more tropical stuff because that's what grows there. And if you live in the North, maybe you should eat different things. So can we talk about that just a little bit? Like, why is locality important?
Mhm. Yeah, well, first of all, if you think about sustainability and just securing your supply chain, we all saw what happened when the grocery stores were like my personal grocery store was like out of potatoes for weeks in 2020. It was insane. Like potatoes, like what are you people buying potatoes for? But like food was literally off the shelves. And so it's nice to be plugged into something that is more local with a shorter supply chain. Only like even if you're only doing it for your own sustainability aspect to make sure your family has food on the table. But then if you go even deeper, I've heard folks talk about how plants consuming the same sunlight as you somehow have like a mirrored biological effect where when you're eating that, it's like synergy. And I can't sit here and tell you I fully understand that, but I've heard it talked about enough to where I'm like, I guess that makes sense. Like a plant in the same environment as me, or even an animal in the same environment as me, is taking in the same things. And so I am going to be experiencing that on a different level than maybe my orange from, Florida or California. And so that's not to say like we only eat local, but I think it's really good to try to spend a portion of your weekly grocery budget on something local. And for us, the easiest way we do that is through our local milk where we get or our local farm where we get raw milk. And I try to spend, I used to say like 50% of our weekly grocery budget on the farm. Right now, it's probably less than that. But I do think having that weekly rhythm of purchasing directly from your farmer is important, especially when they're local. There's a lot of great farms who ship product across the states, and I'm not saying those are bad, but there's something special about having it within your vicinity. And then I also think that just trains you to learn what's actually in season. So when the reason right now, like I'm not buying a ton from them is because like it's just so cold and they pretty much only have like squash and potatoes. And while we are eating a lot of squash and potatoes right now, I'm also still eating some fresh fruit. And I know that that fruit's like hydroponically grown and whatever. And that's fine. I live in 2025. But you get to learn through the seasons just based on what's offered at your local CSA or your farmer's market or your local farm, what they're growing, what's in season, what thrives in your area. And so, like, I know in the spring when strawberries come up, it's like a 2-3 week period and then they're done. And then I know when the cantaloupe come up in like the late summer, it's like my favorite part. Um, so you get to learn that rhythm of what's actually in season because again, if you're not growing your own food, like how would you know? You wouldn't know because everything's in season all the time at the grocery store. And there's definitely benefit to that. I don't think that we need to like never walk into a Kroger. I actually live like 2 minutes down the road from one and I'm there all the time. But I think having an awareness of what seasons you're in, I also think it can match sort of like your energy in that season. The more like hearty stews and the broths and the slow cooked meals in the winter really like not only aid in your seasonal shift because everything's just like slower and dimmer and quiet and cold. And then in the summer, everything is so abundant and there's so much fresh vegetable and very vibrant. And there's just something magical about matching what's on your plate in some level to the season that you're currently experiencing. I'm sure that there's like crazy research validating why we should all eat locally, and I don't even know that for sure, but I can tell you from experience just sourcing locally from my farm for a number of years, there's just a special connection to that food. And for us too, like we are a hunting family, and so we hunt venison. We actually have moose, which is not local to us. We had to travel to hunt that. But even just having hunted local wild game, again, gives you like even deeper reverence for the food that's on your plate. So I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, and something we talk about here often is called the wheel of the year. And it's just this idea that the year is literally a wheel. It keeps turning and turning and turning. And that throughout all of history, all cultures, like it doesn't matter which culture you look at, all cultures have celebrated that wheel, right? And they've eaten within that wheel. And these celebrations and these things that we do to mark the calendar, right, are very food based, are around what's growing locally for them. And this was how our ancestors survived. They learned how to survive by eating with the seasons and learning the seasons and growing with the seasons and working with that wheel. And like you said, in the summer being more abundant, right? And the storing things up in the fall, and then in the winter eating more meat and eating more of the potatoes and all of those things. So if you're having trouble thinking about like, how could I eat seasonally? You really can ask Chat GPT. You can ask at like your computer, like, what is in season, and find out what's in season. And also, I just want to point out there are some great resources to help you find, local farms, because Liz was talking about, working with her local farm. And I think a lot of people might feel like, I have no idea how to do that. I wouldn't know how to get in touch with my farmer. So Max Kane created Farm Match. And so it literally matches you with a farm, farmmatch.com, and it will help you find farms that are local to you where you can get what you need. You can also use, we've been talking about Weston A. Price Foundation. Hilda is going to come on the show actually in just a couple weeks. So that will be fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. And you can go to your local chapter of the Weston A. Price Society and foundation, and they will tell you, here are great farmers. And also there are options like what are called CSAs. And if you just look up those letters, CSA, local food, it will come up. All these things will pop up where you can get food directly from the farmer for a reasonable price. You can get what's in season. So there are lots and lots of options for this. But I just want to echo, right? Like there's a reason that we lived like this for thousands of years, and our bodies are designed to live with the seasons. We are designed to live within the wheel of the year. And that's actually really important. And I think part of our issues are where everything is in season all the time. And to my understanding, if you are eating summer food, then your body will say, oh, it's summer, and it will think it's summer all the time. Combine that with being under this fluorescent light all the time and the blue light. And of course, your body is stressed out because it's like, why is it cold, but it's summer? Like, I don't know how to handle this. So it's just something to think about. But what I really want to touch on that you talked about is the controversial topic of raw milk. So should we talk about raw milk? Why do you choose raw milk? Why do you believe it's safe? Isn't it dangerous? Tell us the dish on raw milk.
Yeah, this is probably my favorite topic. So sorry if I nerd out on it. But for me, raw milk was my entry point into the real food space. And it came out of a deep necessity. So we had a 4-month-old who I was already back to work, and, she already had this clubbed foot thing going on, and she was breaking out in terrible eczema and just not thriving, like crying all the time, screaming all the time. And I was like, I've already had one baby. Like, this wasn't my experience. This isn't right. And so I did this deep dive, and it was actually my husband's aunt who looked at me one day and said, raw milk can be really powerful. You should look into that. And I was like at a family picnic, and I was like, who's this crazy lady saying this? But I went home and I looked it up, and I actually contacted my local farm and said, hey, like, I'm looking for raw milk, and I want to use it in this way. I want to make homemade baby formula because I found a recipe online that is created by this PhD, and it has a lot of great of common sense ingredients in it. And that seems like a better option than what I'm currently feeding her, which is commercial formula, and she's not thriving on it. And they were like, well, we can't tell you what to do, but we can point you to another farm member who has used this, and she can share her experience. So I got on the phone with a stranger. We talked for 2 hours, and she poured her heart out to me. And I just in that moment was like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, I'm not the first person to look to this as a solution. And also there are hundreds of people who are getting this raw milk weekly from this farm. And that's just one of the farms in my area. And so then I started to do what everyone else does. And I started reading books on it and listening to podcasts and looking for podcasts from the owners of raw milk dairies and just learning from them. And I think once you learn the history of milk in general, your eyes, the peel is lifted. You're not under this veil anymore that milk is inherently dangerous. I think that was the single most convincing argument to me, was that it is not like, no one is saying that milk is inherently dangerous. The CDC doesn't say that. The FDA doesn't say that. No one says that milk from an udder is going to kill you. In fact, they don't say, hey, if you have a cow in your backyard and you go milk it, that milk is going to kill you. What they're saying is that milk, like all other living foods, can be a vector for foodborne illness. And there's a big distinction that needs to be made in the conversation of raw milk, because the raw milk killers of the past, the things that we think of when we see those black and white sketch drawn images of the late 1800s and babies are dying, like that stuff really happened. That situation was due to sick cows in a sick environment making people sick. Okay. That is not what we face today in 2025 in the US. Today, what the risk that raw milk carries is strictly foodborne illness. And that's the exact same risk that things like sushi or raw lettuce or Kodak pancakes just were recalled for listeria or something insane, right? Like this packaged pancake mix. A frozen pizza was recently recalled. So if you think that you live in a safe enough food culture that you're never exposed to the risk of foodborne illness, you aren't paying attention. Well, look at how many recalls happen on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and then look at what those recalls are for. Most of the time, it's the products that have had the most hands touched on them, meaning your processed packaged foods. There's also, concern about other living food, right? It can always be a vector for something. And so, luckily, we have not only elevated cow health, we have proper sanitation as a US population, and we also have measures of testing. We can test for these things. We can look, and not every farm does, honestly. And I don't think that it's 100% necessary for a farm to test every single batch of raw milk. I think if you know the process, and I encourage people to visit your farm if you're going to acquire local milk, but if you know that process well enough, again, we've been doing this for thousands of years before at home testing was even an option. The other thing I'll say is that testing often opens up the possibility for the state to come in and make claims that simply are not true. And that's one of the biggest things I learned as well. So there's twofold. It's the things that scared people into pasteurization in the late 1800s are no longer applicable today because we're fighting different battles. So today, the reason why we pasteurize is to simply sterilize a product for better shelf life, eliminate the risk of any foodborne illness, and honestly, it's just standard protocol. The reason back then, again, was because we were bringing these cows in and feeding them food that was not biologically appropriate to them. They were sick themselves with things like tuberculosis and then making other people sick who would then drink their milk. And people did die. And it was a very bad time for human sanitation and food safety. It was. And we learned from that, but I feel like we overcorrected. And the other part of this as well is that there's an ongoing attack on food freedom and specifically raw milk. And if you look at Mark McAfee of Raw Farms, he's been very open and clear about how many times the state of California has come after him and how many times people have blamed his milk for having something that they test over and over and over again, and it's not there. And yet, if you throw up a red flag and you print out a news article about how the California Department of whatever is inspecting this raw dairy farm, what are people going to do? They're not going to buy the milk. They're going to be so freaked out. They're going to jump to conclusions. And this PR tactic happens at every state on every level. And so your raw milk farmer is not going to be jumping the gun to be like, yes, I would like to test and submit that information to my state and open up a conversation where I know the cards are already stacked against me. And that's unfortunate, but it's just the truth. And so this is where having conversations with your farmer, asking them questions like, what are your cows fed? Are they supplemented at all? How are they milked? Are they milked by hand? Are they milked by machine? How do you rinse the tubes and the mechanism of the machine if they are machine milked? How quickly does the milk get cooled down? What's your bottling process? Like, you are allowed as the customer to ask those questions, especially when you're sourcing raw milk at a premium price, which it is at a premium price. And I think it should be, because those farmers need to be honored for their work, and they're not supported by the dairy industry. The dairy industry is very much supportive of the pasteurized model and homogenized model. And so these little farmers are kind of on their own little island. The state and the federal government are not going to be holding their hand or backing them up. And so what's left to support them is the consumer. And so the more conversations you can have with people who, like, we've been drinking raw milk straight for almost 9 years. And like, never once have I been sick. Never once have I known anyone in my herd share who has gotten sick from raw milk. Never once has it even been a question, right? Um, and you can say that's anecdotal all you want, but to say that you're insane for pursuing something that's a whole natural food, I think just comes out of this misunderstanding that we've been fed a lie that milk is inherently dangerous. So I could go on, but I feel like that's already a lot.
Oh, I love it. I'm like, I eat it up, but we need to, so there's a couple questions I've got to ask you about this.
Yeah.
And the first question is, why is pasteurization bad? What's wrong with pasteurization and homogenization?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's like, if it's safe, if it makes it safer, why wouldn't you do it? The issue is the heat processing. Again, it's kind of the similar conversation as seed oils. The heat processing changes food. And if you don't believe that, pour a glass of pasteurized, homogenized milk in a cup and set it on your counter for 3 days and see what happens. And then pour a glass of whole raw milk that's not been homogenized on your counter for 3 days and see what happens. One food will become literally putrid, like so vile and disgusting. And it's the one that's been pasteurized because it has no living balance of bacteria. And so it is primed and ready for anything pathogenic to just come and take over. Versus your whole raw milk is going to have not only a layer of protective cream on top that's going to rise to the top, you're going to have a thick layer of cream. It will probably actually dry out and seal the milk below. And then that milk is going to just naturally sour as any fermented product would. And so, like, if you want to dispute the fact that pasteurization changes the composition of milk, I just think you could do a basic third grade level food experiment in your kitchen and see that that's not true. And to go even deeper, it's the nutrients that are being affected. It's the proteins that are being denatured. It's the enzymes in the food that are being rendered inactive. And people have said there's a lot of confusion, like whether raw milk has lactase in it or not. And my understanding is that lactase is not actually in the raw milk itself. So lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. But you consuming that raw milk helps your own body facilitate that digestive enzyme needed to break down the milk because it's in its whole raw form. And I don't even like having to call it raw. It's honestly just normal milk. And the other stuff is the processed milk, right? The other thing that is a concern is homogenization. And when you look at that, you see that that's strictly driven by consumer desire. People didn't love that, like, their cream would rise to the top. If you're pouring it off to like bake something, a big like chunk will come out, or it's kind of like hard to fuss with. You have to shake it a little bit. And so they started homogenizing to basically evenly disperse the fat throughout the entire milk so that there is no cream line. One, so that you can't actually tell how much fat's in there, or they can just take all the fat out and then add it back in at the proper percentage to sell you. So 2% milk or 1% milk or skim milk. And then two, it just has a better look and feel. It's a lot whiter. If you look at homogenized milk, it has this crisp, like, white look to it versus a raw milk's going to be maybe a little like tinge of like blue on the bottom and the cream will be a little yellow. Which is so funny because like that's exactly what breast milk looks like non-pasteurized milk, non-homogenized milk from a mammal also looks like that. But what happens, unfortunately, is that when they blast those fat globules to really like disperse them evenly in the cup, they blast into these like tiny little fragments. And some people say that those fragments are so small they can just bypass the digestive system and go right into the bloodstream and elicit this immune response because we're having these little itty bits of dairy fat in our blood that are not going through the proper system. And that's where you see a lot of people that struggle with milk intolerance. And so you can have lactose intolerance, which is the intolerance to the sugars in milk, or you can have like a casein and whey intolerance, which is the intolerance to the proteins in milk. But again, if you're only drinking pasteurized milk, how do you know that that's not because those elements have been changed through the heat process? And it's not like this milk is like heated a little bit on the stove and then like cooled and packaged. This stuff is being heated very quickly at very high temperatures. And unfortunately, the most aggressive form of pasteurization happens to our organic milk. So these beautiful farmers that are like trying so hard to feed their cows this organic grass, or if they are supplementing with feed, it has to be certified organic. Their milk has to go then get ultra high temp pasteurized because there's so few organic farmers in the States that milk has to travel a lot further. And so it needs to be like shelf stable. And the craziest thing I learned is that technically UHT milk can just live on your center aisles of your grocery store. It does not even have to be refrigerated because it is rendered completely sterile. And so for me, if I'm looking at that and then looking at my whole raw milk, which naturally sours over time, has a cream top separation, and just comes from one cow, literally just one cow and not like a bunch of cows all mixed together, I'm like, that is going to be a more whole, rich, real food. And yes, it's more expensive, but again, we're honoring the farmer in that lengthy process. And I've already kind of touched on the point that he's not very well supported by anything else that the conventional dairy farmers might be getting in terms of like subsidies or even just like having consumer backing. Like these raw milk farmers have to literally just claw and fight their way through and hope that there are consumers who are informed enough to make a decision to buy their product. And so, yeah, that's a very short spiel on pasteurization.
Yeah, perfect, which I love. I love hearing you talk about it. I love the passion. And I'm sure people are like, I didn't know this much about milk. Like, I had no idea there was a,
I know it's
but
embarrassing.
no, it's not. It's amazing. I love it so much because there's another piece we have to dig into a little bit concerning this because people are like, that it's so much information for people, right? And as a kid, I went to Louis Pasteur High
Mm.
School or
Mm.
middle school. And we're always told, right? Pasteurization saved everyone, right? We were all
Yeah.
saved. It's the best thing that
Hmm.
ever happened. Thank you, Louis, for everything you did for us,
Yeah.
right? Thank you, France. But what I want to point out, and this is going to go on with, we want to talk a little bit about fermented foods too, because they're in this same vein. But I want to go back to what we were talking about with the history of raw milk, because a lot of people don't understand what happened, why did this happen. And we see in the 1800s, and I have talked about this on a previous podcast a little bit, when we talked about money, feminine money wounds and things like that, in the 1800s we see this drop of a lot of things, right? We see a lot of illness, everybody's sick, babies are dying, there's lots of things. Lots of people attribute that to things like raw milk and not having not having the care that we have now. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, that's not true. None of that is actually really legit when you dig into it, even babies dying, right? But the 1800s is what we remember. Like when people are scared of things, they're like, oh, but look at the 1800s, everyone was dying because of raw milk, everyone was dying because of all of these things, and all these babies were dying because we didn't have these amazing doctors who were performing C-sections and doing all these things. They were doing C-sections in the 1800s. P.S. By the way, big time they were. That's when the C-section was invented. Not to say, anyway, that's not to throw any shade on anyone who's had a C-section. Please don't take it that way. I'm just saying we changed a lot of things during that
Hmm.
time. So can you, like, let's go back and talk about, like, why is the 1800s this, like, big time where then we're getting rid of things like raw milk, we're getting rid of like natural remedies, we're getting rid of natural birth, because before, birth was all midwives, all that kind of stuff. So what is it about the 1800s? Why is this happening? Let's go into the history.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know that Pasteur got his first sort of like claim to fame through the French wine industry because they wanted to have their wine be shipped further distribution. And so they're like, oh, it's the natural enzymes in the wine are breaking down. And so by the time it gets to its like preferred destination, it's already kind of sour. It's going into vinegar or whatever. And so he is really the guy who was like, oh, let's heat it up and render those enzymes like inert, like render them completely inactive. That way they won't continue to sour or ferment or whatever your wine. And so they were like, this is great. This is amazing. We can ship our wine further and have a larger market to sell to. And then eventually they became disillusioned with it. And they were like, actually, this is changing the flavor of the wine and we don't like this anymore. And while it seemed really good at first, it has some negative side effects. And so a beautiful opportunity then was to apply that same kind of logic to milk when milk was also proving to be dangerous. So in the late 1800s, you see a lot of people move from this very agrarian lifestyle, which is like I live on a little plot of land and I might have like a cow or my neighbor has a cow and I grow a lot of food. I hunt, I fish, I maybe have some domesticated livestock, but like in general, I'm very close to my food and my food network. And then you move into these larger cities, these larger communities where everyone's kind of coming together and they're bringing with them their old mindset of like, oh, bring all my food, like bring the cows, bring the chickens, bring it all into the city. So then you have this kind of collection of cows, but I would call it like the first feedlots, right? And typically we discovered like, oh, well, cows can kind of metabolize grain. So if we just give them the spent grain that we've used to make alcohol, then we are upcycling, right? Very good intention. We are upcycling this spent grain that was used to make alcohol. We're feeding it to the cows. The cows produce milk. Now we can drink the milk. This is great. This is awesome. And everything seems very like shiny and new and yay science until you realize that a cow on that particular diet will eventually lose its teeth. It will be so weak it can't stand anymore. It will die of awful illness, chronic illness, but then also just like live a horrible life. You stack the cow's poor health due to their poor diet onto the fact that they are living in very close quarters. We did not respect the fact that they were just like standing in their own feces. So their udders are getting dirty. We're milking them now out of these very dirty environments. And then that milk in open pails is going all around and it's getting dropped off on door fronts and maybe sitting out in the sun. And those things are just left to breed in this very living food. Like raw milk is a living food teeming with bacteria. That is good. We should not be scared of that. In the same way that we are like praising the bacteria that ferment our cabbage, then we turn around and we're like, oh, but raw milk is dangerous. That doesn't make sense. Those two things are on the same plane. One is just of animal source, and one is a like one is an animal. What do you call that on like the thing in which it grows, and one is the what's the word I'm thinking of? I
One
can't.
is an animal byproduct and the other one's a plant. Is that
Yeah, but the word is like the medium. One is an animal
medium?
medium and one is a plant medium, right? And so we get all freaked out until it's like, oh, I love sauerkraut. Like I love fermenting things in my home, and because of the beneficial bacteria in there. Now, that's not to say that raw milk comes out pre-fermented, but it is teeming with beneficial bacteria. And so this is what happened. We moved into society shifted, and it wasn't like an overnight shift. It was a slow shift, and I think one of the coolest data points that I like to share is that it took about 100 years from the time of Louis Pasteur to the time where the United States government mandated pasteurization. So you're talking about a time span of almost 100 years where it wasn't like all of a sudden people were milking their cows out in the country and they're like, oh, shoot, we're getting sick, Betsy. Like, this is probably not a good food for us. That's not what was happening. What was happening is time and time again, it would be due to all the different variables I've already said. People would have these outbreaks or people would get sick, or maybe even they would get sick from something else and then blame the milk. That happens too. But over time, as this society is shifting to more of an industrial model where we are then working together in close proximity and living and having to supply food to a large portion of people, we realize like, hey, we need some food safety measures. And like the same thing we did in our backyard can't really be done on at scale. And so to do that, we need to bring in things like pasteurization. And just to be clear, milk is not the only thing pasteurized in your grocery store. Like orange juice is pasteurized in your grocery store, and yet we eat a raw orange and we don't think anything of it. We don't go then say, oh, you can't eat that orange until it's been pasteurized because, in the carton it says it's pasteurized for your safety. We don't do that. So for some reason, we have it in our heads, and probably because most of us haven't ever milked a cow before or like been around a lactating animal, but like we have it in our head that it's like the milk that's the problem, where it's actually the industry that produces a more risky environment for things like foodborne illness. And honestly, that's like a risk that you have to weigh for yourself. Like, I'm not saying go up to your standard commercial dairy and ask for a glass of raw milk, although I promise you, the people at that dairy that work and live there are drinking that milk raw. I've talked to so many dairy farmers, and every single one says we consume our milk raw. So you have to ask yourself, like, well, what is that? Well, it's because of the distribution of the milk, and it's because of the widespread um, having to supply a lot of people through a couple like dairies here and there. And so, again, in theory, it's a positive thing. It's not like pasteurization was set out to denature food and lower its nutritional quality. That's just unfortunately a byproduct that it has.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point, and I think that's important to point out, right? We use it for lots of different things, and really the issue here is like thinking about the 1800s, right? We also are still working with lead. We've got a lot
Hmm.
of lead, we've got a lot of lead paint, we've got so many people, I mean lead paint was really like the 50s, but we're using all different kinds of things we would never use now, poisons and toxins that and like mercury, right? People were playing with mercury with their hands, this, I mean, this happened all the way up through the 50s and 60s. Like my dad told me about when he was a kid and that he would open the thermometer and play with mercury in his hands as
Oh
a
my.
kid.
Oh
Yeah.
my.
So like I mean, we're squishing all the people together in this tiny city, right? We have all these small people are throwing, we didn't have the same sewer system we have now. People are throwing their defecation outside all over the streets. Like this time in the 1800s, right, where we have built up this industrial society and we're trying to make more and more and more and more and more, and all the railroad tracks and all of that kind of stuff. Well, all the byproduct of that is a really sick people, are really, especially for animals and delicate animals and people. And that's when we get all these crazy things that happen, these outbreaks, but it's blamed on just solely the milk, right? That's when you get unhealthy milk, unhealthy food is in that kind of environment. And so, yeah, one thing that Louis Pasteur did very well, which was helpful, which is it helps us think about hygiene. We need to think about hygiene. Hygiene is important. And even the CDC will tell you this, that hygiene really is the thing that has solved the world's problems. You
Hmm.
can look it up. There's a 2005 study where they talked about what is the thing that has helped us the most, right? It's sewers. It's getting rid of all of the things that were making stuff unclean with the hygiene. It actually isn't necessarily just pasteurization. So pasteurization sometimes can be a piece of that. Like I'm thinking about sterilizing instruments when you are operating on someone. Like, yes, that's an important part. Like pasteurization is helpful for that. But when it comes to food, we need to like think about it, because without knowing it, we have denatured these foods. We've made them into something that our bodies can't handle. And that's
Hmm.
a really big issue,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, there's even like some argument for like some heat treatment of milk. So the example I'm thinking of is when you make yogurt, you actually do want to get rid of some of the existing bacteria there because you're going to re-inoculate it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're making yogurt, you can absolutely make yogurt with raw milk and never heat it up to a point to kill bacteria. That's the yogurt that I eat. But if you are following a more like conventional way, you can have more control over the strands of bacteria. And so you can take that milk, heat it gently, reintroduce the specific bacteria that you want to produce a yogurt. And I see people do that all the time. So it's not like you can never bake with raw milk, right? Or you can't ever do anything. But the broad understanding that milk is inherently dangerous is just not true, and it's not factual.
Yeah, it's not. And it's just our skewed view of history and what we've seen. And now this is why, right? Now we're reintroducing things and we're doing studies about how we really need more bacteria in our lives, right? Humans are just not meant to live in the environment we're living in, and we're not meant to live in such close proximity and in our own bacteria all the time. We need new sources. And so we're seeing that very, very clearly in the research. Sorry, this is the nerd of me who worked in research for 7 years.
Mhm.
This is my job. But now that we've talked all about that, I love it. I love every minute of it. I can soak it up. But I really want to turn a little bit to your curriculum that you've made and your home and the home piece of this,
Mhm.
teaching children, and how do we teach our children, how do we get them excited about food? Because I know so many mothers who would say, like, my kids will never eat regular food. It's incredibly difficult. They're very, very picky. So let's turn this inward. How do we make some of these choices? What does your curriculum cover, and how? And just like, how do we teach kids about real food?
Yeah, I love that question. First of all, you can teach kids about real food in your home every day on a daily basis. You do not need my curriculum to do that. My curriculum is merely a good tool in your toolbox, and it's just something to add on to give more context to the things you're already doing in your house. And so it really starts with you. If you're a mom and you're like, shoot, I don't know how to nourish myself well, the first step that you will take is to figure that out for yourself so that you can then be an example to your kids. And a lot of us learn alongside of our kids. And I think that's totally fine. That's honestly a beauty of homeschooling. If you're like, oh, I'm going through this curriculum, I learned something new today, like that's pretty fun. So starting as the mom, I want you to have confidence to know how to fuel your body well, how to source that within your own grocery budget. Because if not, this is all just theoretical and you can't actually activate it. And that has looked different in multiple seasons of our life, right? And so sometimes we have to prioritize, like, hey, we're getting our raw milk still, but like I couldn't get everything 100% organic at the store, and that's okay. Or you have conversations with your spouse about, like, hey, if we upfront the cost of this half cow, it's actually going to be cheaper, but we have to manipulate our finances in a way to have that large sum of money. But I promise it'll pay off in the back end. These are all conversations you should have in your home, but first start with yourself. So figure out how I want to fuel myself. And an amazing way to just do that is to listen to folks like you and dig into other podcasts, read books, all kinds of things online are available. Or also just think about protein, veggie, starch. How can I get that at every meal? How can I keep it really simple? And then as you're cooking in your kitchen, your kids can be invited in, they can participate in that. Working together in the kitchen doesn't just have to be like baking a batch of cookies. Like that's like the, quintessential like mom time, like, oh, flowers everywhere, we're so cute. And that's fine. But like what you're left with is a batch of sugary cookies. So like, do you want to just associate that with a treat? Or do you want to be like, hey, help me come chop this vegetable. This is for our dinner. And that way, when they sit down at the dinner table later, they're like, oh, I had a part in putting this on the table. So teaching your kids about real food is conversations all the time. Conversations in the grocery store, conversations about like they'll pull a product off the shelf. I'm like, Mom, can we please get this? This has like My Little Pony on the front. And I literally say, I'm like, yeah, that's a great marketing tool. And you are being so sold to right now, girl. Like you are falling for it. And so I'll be like, flip over the ingredients. What do they say? And they're like, oh, well, high fructose corn syrup. I'm like, no, yeah, that's a pass for me, guys. Like I'm not anti-treat, but I don't need to buy this treat because the box is pretty. Like that's not how we choose our food. That's not what dictates our food value. It's not the packaging, it's what's inside. Have those conversations. Honestly, it's kind of a pain to like shop with all your kids in the grocery store, but if you can do it like once a month or something, if you can do it weekly, you're a champion. And so continue doing that and having those conversations as you go. And then when you bring that food back into the kitchen, talking to them about like every kid loves to feel important and like chop a cucumber. It's a very soft vegetable to start with. It's not like chopping a carrot where it's the same kind of hardness as their finger. They're not going to like lose a finger on a cucumber, hopefully, and stand right next to them as they're chopping it. I'm a big proponent of giving kids real knives, not the kiddie stuff, because what they learn with those kiddie plastic knives is that they have to put a lot of force and effort, and that's not going to translate into proper knife skills when they get older. You want them to practice on a real sharp knife, but under the guidance of you standing right there. Make sure the blade is small enough so that they're not actually accidentally going to like nick their fingers. But helping them, just like little things, start small. Chop a cucumber, have a conversation at the grocery store, thaw out your meat and talk to them about like, hey, this is part of that cow that we bought from that farmer. Remember when we went to pick up that meat from the farmer? Or remember when dad brought home that deer? That's what this deer is. And we're going to have this portion of the meat tonight. And because it's a tougher muscle, we're going to slow cook it so that it's nice and juicy for us and we're not like chewing for 4 hours. And then beyond that, you can use tools that kind of reiterate the stuff that you're already saying, like our homegrown curriculum. And you can, I love like watching cooking shows with my kids, because if you watch a cooking show with a real chef, he's most of the time, or she's most of the time, going to be using whole food ingredients at the freshest, like the peak of freshness, and doing very simple preparations with them because they're respecting the ingredient. And you can learn a lot just by watching like chef shows like on YouTube, or honestly, like Netflix has some good series. There are also wonderful documentaries. I love the documentary Sustainable. I love the Netflix series Cooked with Mark Bittman. I love Kiss the Ground, The Biggest Little Farm. Those are just a couple. I think Common Ground is about to come out, which is the sequel sort of ish to Kiss the Ground, I believe. So there's a lot of great like documentaries that can give your kids a visual for the farming and food industry without having to literally step foot on the farm. And then the next step as you graduate into this is go visit your farm. We went to visit our raw milk herd share folks, and like as we were leaving, and keep in mind this is a Amish community, and so it looked very different to my girls than what suburban Cincinnati, Ohio looks like. And as we were pulling out, my little daughter Ruth was like, I want to have my birthday party here. Like she was like, this is my jam. Like I'm with the cows. I saw where they pour our milk, and there's no decor, there's no adornation of anything. Like there's no color, right? It's very simple and modest because that is the Amish way. And she was in love. She was enamored. And it's just like, it was so cool to see her like respect and appreciate their work so much that she literally wanted to host her birthday party there. I was like, that's not really feasible, but I love that you want to do that. So taking your kids onto the farm is a great way to do that. And then once they're in nature and they have these core memories, whether it's like, oh, I remember visiting those goats that one time and trying the goat milk, or I remember when I saw dad skinning that deer, or I remember watching my mom bake bread with sourdough starter culture, they're going to be so much better set up to like combat the industrial food system because they have this knowledge on the forefront, and they're not having to like relearn in the midst of having grown up on only packaged foods and then being like, wait a minute, there's like a real version of this. Like, oh, let me like look up my favorite blogger and find a recipe for that. So I think all of those things can be utilized. And I think for the mom that's dealing with a picky eater, like I have also been there. And that is where there is hope. There's definitely hope. My biggest sort of like piece of advice, if that's even what you want to call it, is if you do have subsequent children, starting them off on the right foot can be a huge game changer. So starting them with the proper first foods and really setting up their gut microbiome to be healthy and balanced so that they're not only craving sugars is really helpful. But even for the kid who grew up and they're 6 years old and now you're like, oh shoot, I got to change our food. You can do that because my daughter was, let's see, she was like 8 when we started, or maybe 6 years old when we started really shifting to real food. So she had to like learn with us and make those changes. And it starts small. And sometimes that looks like making their favorite store-bought foods from home and showing them that, oh, actually they can taste really good and you can be a part of it. So there are lots of opportunities. The world is like, the amount of resources available to you are endless, truthfully. So it's more about like picking what works for you and what resonates with you and your family and just trying it out.
Yeah, I really love that. I love your emphasis on like, it's up to you. There are so many different varieties of ways you can do this, and that it's so possible for you to do it in your home. I'm wondering, do you have any advice? Like, I know you touched on this And I also like so much respect for you having been through being a single mom, because I think it can be so overwhelming for
Mhm.
someone who is a single mom. But do you have any advice for parents who feel like, well, my kids are 6 and 7 and 10 and I've, ruined them, so to speak, or whatever. You've never ruined your kids, but maybe you're feeling that way with this. Like, I could never get my kids to eat that way. Like, how did you successfully do that with your daughter? And any advice you have for single mothers trying to bring more health into their home?
Yeah. So, first of all, if you are the parent that has kids that you feel like they're not eating the foods they need to be eating, learn again, it kind of starts with you, like, learn how to cook in a way that, like, no one wants to turn down your food. Like, is it just a seasoning issue? Are you just not salting your food enough? Because while that sounds kind of wild, I think a lot of us didn't grow up learning how to cook. And so when it comes to cooking, we're kind of just like following a recipe and hoping it turns out well. But what if you had a little more knowledge and understanding of, like, instead of having to buy the frozen chicken tender at the store, if you could take just chicken breasts and butterfly them, or take chicken tenders and coat them and fry them in a pan, just to give your kid that level of variety, because that chicken tender is going to taste different every time you make it, because your seasoning is going to be a little bit different, and that's going to shake them from this world of everything is cookie cutter and uniform. And that's one of the biggest hurdles that you have to face, is if they grew up on a lot of processed packaged foods like I did, they're going to have to get used to things tasting similar but different textures. They're going to have a bite of meat that has a little bit of fatty or gristle on that, and they're going to have to figure out what to do with that. The store food that they bought previously, or that they were consuming previously, a lot of those variables are taken out. And so it's usually a consistency issue. So start just making their favorite foods from scratch when you can, when it's feasible to introduce them slowly into that. And then from there, you can I like personally, I like doing little challenges with my kids. So, like, this January, our family did like a sugar cleanse for 30 days. And what that looked like is we didn't eat anything with added sweetener, even if it was like maple syrup or honey. And we just ate a lot of fruit, and we learned how to navigate our diet around like heavy protein, quality carbohydrates, lots of fruits and veggies, and we kept it really simple. And it was this whole family wide conversation. It wasn't like we were telling our kid, like, you're eating too much candy, you need to stop. It was like, hey, as a whole, we're going to practice this new thing of discipline, and we're going to try this out and see how our body feels with it. So you could do like little bursts of family wide challenges. You could do like one night a week. Hey, we're going to try a new recipe tonight. We're all going to sit down. This is new to all of us, but we're going to taste it together. And that one meal isn't enough to make you freak out if they don't really touch it, and they're not going to starve, right? But it is introducing this topic of, or introducing this new variable of trying a food, and we're all doing it together. And I'm not alone and scared of my plate, and my parents don't have empathy for me. It's we're doing this as a family. Um, the single mom part is, it's funny because I was very, very young. I was not in my real food journey, but I was purchasing like the convenience baby foods, I'll say, from the store. And actually, very quickly, I realized like these are too expensive. Like, I can't afford to buy these anymore. So I started homemaking baby food. But what that looked like back then was like blending up like steamed peas and carrots, and like not the most nutrient dense foods as baby's first food, but like I was trying. So I give a small nod to like 18-year-old Liz, but um it's actually funny how much more expensive a lot of these packaged foods are. So when I'm talking to people who have limited grocery budgets, because I've had a wide variety of grocery budgets, and still to this day, it's not like it's not a free for all. I'd always just go back to like, what is actually necessity and what gives you the biggest bang for your buck nutritionally? Because that $5 box of cereal, because you think that it's like, oh, this is just like an easy breakfast, is actually $5 wasted on a lot of fronts, and especially nutritionally, because you're just going to be getting like a huge serving of sugar, and it's not going to match or even come close to maybe a $5 carton of eggs, which right now carton of eggs is more like $10. But you have to look at your food not only for its like monetary value, like, oh, I have a coupon for this, but its nutritional value. So how satiating is that thing? And I don't want people like going to the grocery store and buying a single bag of chips if they're telling me that they can't afford to buy meat and eggs. Like, cut out the stuff that is just not necessity. And that can be hard because it's like a lot of this stuff is our comfort and we grew up eating it and it's fun for us. But if there's a season of your life where you're so pared down to the foods that you can buy, make sure that every dollar is well spent. So buy your like full fat yogurt, buy your eggs, buy your butter, buy your meat, get fruits and vegetables. I don't even care if they're organic. If you're on such a tight budget, just get the whole real food. And then as your budget starts to experience a little bit more freedom, you can start elevating the quality of those ingredients. But everything basically in those center aisles that is coming in a package that has to pay a marketing team to sell that to you is not needed, truthfully. So just cutting down to the bare minimum is the best budget saver that I have experienced in our life.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great, great tip because I do know that's the other thing that people get hung up on is, oh, it's going to cost so much. It's
Yeah.
so expensive to do this. This will be too expensive. I can't eat well because it's too expensive. And I know I even said that. Like my sister, who you've met, she will like encourage me when I was probably I must have been 20 or I was 21 when she like showed me this, real food documentary and she was encouraging me and I was like, I just don't have the money to like pay for real food, but like you said, like it doesn't have to be organic in the beginning. It doesn't have to be all these things. And also it's reordering our priorities a little bit because I promise you there are things that you're spending money on that you don't actually need or aren't fulfilling you or aren't taking care of you that you could let go of.
Hmm.
And that would help you put your money where it's going to actually really benefit you and heal you.
Hmm.
And that was the case for me. I had to learn how to do that. But you can start exactly like what Liz said. Like, you don't have to have everything perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just try to get some whole, real foods in you and your
Hmm.
family.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up, I would just love to ask you because at the very top of the podcast, well, before we even aired, we were talking a little bit about the message that you really want women to have right now, the message that you want people to feel, and it has to do with the home. So I would love to hear that message that you have for everybody listening, what women need to know right now.
Yeah. The reason I like came up with the word homegrown in the first place is because at its core, I just feel like all of our values that we instill in our kids are built around the dining room table. Like they're just started in the home. Even if like you're not eating homegrown vegetables, I don't care. At least talk about them in the home and have that conversation. And what I had mentioned before is like we see a lot of public discourse right now about what's happening in government and policy and positive changes. And whether you view those as positive or negative, it doesn't matter. The point is that we can get really excited about the idea that things can change on a large industry scale, but it still comes down to you as the steward of your home. And I know people know that. And so I don't want to come off and say like, but it's still down to you. Yes, of course, we don't want to be battling big industry, big food, big pharma. We don't want them coming after us, but there's so much agency you have. And so I think that that's something I've learned over the years is like, even in every stage of life that I've had or every stage of parenting that I've been participating in, I have agency. And so it's amazing what we can do in our homes when we just first educate ourselves and learn a little bit, when we equip ourselves with some of the basic skills in this food conversation that would be like cooking and baking and fermenting and things like that, getting in community with other people so that you don't feel like you're crazy, so that you can ask them the questions about things that are brand new to you and learn from people who've been doing it longer. All of those things are really beautiful. And what that's going to lead to is a family who has a rich food culture, a rich food value system. And your kids are going to benefit from that when they're off on their own someday, because they're going to go out and they're going to be enamored with the My Little Ponies of whatever that looks like in their 20s. And You want them to have a firm foundation, as you do with anything, with faith, with family, with all values. But food specifically is just hard because we have to feed ourselves 3 times a day, and you have to know how to do that. And it's just really confusing in today's diet culture and just in general. And so, just a gentle reminder to the mom that, like, all of this effort, it feels weighty and heavy, but it's so worth it. I know from my family, I've seen just night and day difference in whole real food. And even if that's like as far as you get, right? Just stopping there and getting back to some of our roots of nourishment is so powerful. And so all that effort you're putting into that shopping list or that grocery trip that took 30 extra minutes because your toddler was with you, or that dining room moment where your kid's not even eating the dinner you cooked, right? Just that's worthy effort and work, and you're doing amazing. So that's kind of how I want to leave people.
What a beautiful message. Yeah, it all starts with us and what we decide in our home. And it is so worth it. I've seen it in my family. Second testament to this, like I've seen how much the way that we eat and what we put into our bodies has changed my kids and helped us so much and helped me so much.
Yeah.
And I feel people won't, may not believe this, but like I was one of those people who thought I was dairy intolerant for a long time, that I couldn't have that, but I can drink raw milk and I can tell the difference, and I can eat real cheese, even like cheeses, like I can eat real cheese and just real food, and just turning inward can really help us, and seeing our home as our sacred space and what we want to let into that space is so important. So that's such a beautiful message, Liz. Thank you so much for being here with us, giving us our time. I know you have a tiny baby that
Mhm.
you still have to attend to who probably just needs you, and you're probably doing so much nursing and all the things. So we want to let you get back to that. But if people want to connect with you and find you, where can they do that? And how can they get your curriculum?
Yeah, so you can connect with me on Instagram. I'm there, homegrown_education. You can find our curriculum, which we have for both early elementary and sort of like pre-K. Um, second grade. And then we also have an upper elementary for like third through sixth grade. You can find that at homegrowneducation.org. All of our stuff's there. We also have some free resources. So we have a free raw dairy guide. If anything I said today about milk is somewhat interesting, go get that raw dairy guide and just download it for free. There's tons of references there. Dig into that, learn there. We have a free sourdough guide if you're like, I want to learn how to bake bread, but I don't know how. And then we actually have like a homeschooling ebook too, if that's your thing. So just grab our free resources, if anything, and I hope they bless your family. And then we do have a little shop called Hazelmeyer Goods, and you can find that at shoptheage.com.
Amazing. Her products are so cool, everyone. So please, please, please go check out Liz. She's amazing. Her podcast is called Homegrown.
The Homegrown
Yeah.
Podcast. Yep.
Homegrown podcast. It's great. You can find my episodes on there if you want,
Yeah.
but everything on there is wonderful. And thank you again, Liz, for being with us. And everyone, have a great week.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Please make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening and share with someone you know. See you next week.